The way we eat has changed more in the last 50 years than in the previous 10,000. But the image that's used to sell the food, it is still the imagery of agrarian America. You go into the supermarket and you see pictures of farmers. The picket fence and the silo and the 30s farmhouse and the green grass. It's the spinning of this pastoral fantasy. The modern American supermarket has on average 47,000 products. There are no seasons in the American supermarket. Now there are tomatoes all year round, grown halfway around the world, picked when it was green, and ripened with ethylene gas. Although it looks like a tomato, it's kind of a notional tomato. I mean, it's the idea of a tomato. In the meat aisle, there are no bones anymore.
There is this deliberate veil, this curtain that's dropped between us and where our food is coming from. The industry doesn't want you to know the truth about what you're eating, because if you knew, you might not want to eat it.
If you follow the food chain back from those shrink-wrapped packages of meat, you find a very different reality. The reality is a factory. It's not a farm, it's a factory. That meat is being processed by huge multinational corporations that have very little to do with ranches and farmers.
Now our food is coming from enormous assembly lines where the animals and the workers are being abused. And the food has become much more dangerous in ways that are being deliberately hidden from us.
You've got a small group of multinational corporations who control the entire food system. From seed to the supermarket, they're gaining control of food.
This isn't just about what we're eating. This is about what we're allowed to say, what we're allowed to know. It's not just our health that's at risk.
The companies don't want farmers talking. They don't want this story told.
My name's Jules, and I'm Jess's mom. And my partner Sue and I farm 20 acres outside of Austin, Texas. And we farm following the 3 values that are on our logo. And that is humane, organic, and local. We read one of Joel Salatin's books, and he's featured in Foodie, and took away that the place to start is by identifying your values. So we identified the values humane, organic, and local. Be our decision-making basis, and to be also our logo. It's our public face. And we put humane first because it matters most to me that the animals that are in our care have good lives. We raise chickens for eggs and meat. We raise ducks for eggs, and we raise cattle for meat and as breeders, because it's a registered breed called a South Pole cattle, which is meant to do well in the heat of the South. And then we've also begun a market garden and a very fledgling orchard, which we lost half of in the heat last year.
What led you to this life?
What led us here is buying the land, and that was one of those magical happenstances. I really didn't want to deal with Austin traffic, and we began looking and found this beautiful piece of land, and it only had cattle on it and a lot of trees, which is unusual in cattle country. And once we moved, we built a 14 by 20 foot house, and we wanted to have a small footprint, which 14 by 20 feet is a small footprint. And we have a gray and black water recycling system, so we don't waste our water. When it's spent, we use it for growing plants. And we decided to farm after reading You Can Farm by Joel Salatin. We have a South Pole herd of just 2 cows and 2 heifers, and our 20 acres won't sustain many more than that. We have a fledgling orchard. We have a beginning of a market garden. And I'm just getting ready to add, I think, vermiculture, which is the raising of worms in some of our woodlands. So we have about 3.5 acres in woods, about 3 acres in ponds that we leave as alone as possible for wildlife, and the rest of it is this treed, it's called black oak savanna or post oak savanna, which is what's native in the area. So we follow the values of being humane, where the quality of life for our animals come first. And that means that our animals don't live in buildings, and they don't live on concrete, and they don't live smashed together. They live on the dirt, and we move their pastures so that they aren't harmful, so that they spread the wealth around with their manure. But they have fresh grass, and they have bugs, and the chickens get to scratch, and they roll around in the dirt, take dust baths, and they have a great time. The ducks go waddling off, and we have this runoff pond, and they love it in there, and they have a fine time in there, and they catch frogs and be ducks. And the cattle wander, and we rotate the pastures so that none of these animals put too much pressure on the land and the soil. We also have to think about how much stress our animals are under during transportation. So we do not raise the classic breed of meat chicken called a Cornish cross, because they have been so genetically distorted that they can't live a real chicken life and they can't live a long life. Most of the chicken in grocery stores have been raised for between 4 and 6 weeks, and their legs break. They're genetically coded to grow big breasts and very, very quickly, rather than growing their skeletal systems and their organs first. So we raise a French breed, a French stock, that qualifies for France's La Belle Rouge, which is much more stringent than the United States organic. And that means we have to have them sent via mail. And they arrive from Pennsylvania 2 days old and hungry and thirsty. And on the other end of their lives, because we don't have a processing facility on our land, we have to put them in crates and transport them to a processor. And right now we're trying to find one within an hour of our farm. And we now have to get up in the middle of the night because it's much easier for them to be moved when they're sleeping. And then we drive through the night so that at dawn we arrive at the facility and they have had much less stress. And that means that their lives have been better, their deaths have been better, and actually the food tastes better because the adrenaline of fear and pain are not excreted into the meat. And you would be amazed at how sweet meat, chicken and cattle meat, can taste when it's been produced with no stress.
Jules, I actually have some experience with that from lobster diving. As a scuba diver, I would do that every year in San Diego around October. And the first couple catches that we made the mistake of taking them home and snapping their necks and cooking them, not realizing that that's what happens, that the adrenaline gets shot in, and it makes a difference in the texture as well as the taste. And not to justify what I'm doing, but we found that the best way to do it really is to put them in the refrigerator overnight and let them slowly fall asleep and die.
It's amazing when you're being thoughtful about animals, some of the things you end up doing. Because if you're going to eat meat, then someone has to make it. And how you make it and how you make it move from life to death becomes important and not something that most folks ever even think about.
Is that pretty much how all farmers who farm sustainably feel about raising meat, or is this your individual feeling? I'm just curious because when I read up on the definition, it has to do with making sure that the waste from animals and preparation is also used and not wasteful. It's about a full circle of how you do this. Does this also seem to fit in with other farmers who do this sustainably?
Good question, because the sustainability focus really is on having a net effect on the soils and the microbiology of the soils. So one would not have to be humane to be technically sustainable. My definition of sustainable also includes the, we could call it karmic, but the what goes around comes around truth.